At 2 in the morning, my mother stood on the front porch in her nightgown, throwing my clothes into the street while shouting to the neighbors that I was unstable and had decided to run away. By sunrise, half the neighborhood knew she was lying. My name is Tessa Morgan, and I was 28 years old the night my mother decided humiliation would work faster than control. I had moved back into her house 8 months earlier after my divorce. That detail matters, because people here moved back in with my mom and immediately imagine failure. What they don't imagine is the daughter quietly covering half the mortgage because her mother was behind on payments. They don't imagine the daughter paying utility bills without being asked, buying groceries, fixing the broken dryer, and pretending not to notice that every act of support came with one silent condition. I was allowed to stay only as long as I stayed easy to control. My mother, Linda, cared more about appearances than truth. She liked being seen as generous, long-suffering, endlessly patient, in public. She called me my poor daughter going through a hard time. In private, she reminded me the house was hers, the rules were hers, and I should be grateful she had taken me back. That was how she operated. Kindness in front of witnesses, cruelty in rooms with doors. The fight started over money, but it was never really about money. Earlier that evening, she told me my younger brother Dean was behind on rent again and needed help. Dean was 32, healthy, and perfectly capable of ruining his own life without my assistance. He had spent years bouncing between jobs, girlfriends, and excuses. And my mother still spoke about him like he was one good week away from becoming someone responsible. I already helped him in January, I said from the kitchen table, trying to keep my voice calm. He's your brother, and I'm your daughter, I said. That doesn't seem to matter when I'm paying bills here. Her face changed the second I said that. That was the trigger with her. Any sentence that pulled the curtain back. She could ask for money, time, emotional labor, silence. But the second I named the pattern, she acted like I had committed some deep moral violation. So now you're keeping score? She snapped. No, I'm setting a boundary. She laughed then, sharp and ugly. People like you always call it a boundary when they're being selfish. People like you. I should have gone to bed and locked my door. I know that now. But I was tired. Tired in that deep, dangerous way that makes old pain rise too quickly. I looked at her and said the one thing she could never tolerate hearing from me. I'm done funding everyone else's mess. The room went still. She stared at me for 2 seconds, then stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. Then maybe you shouldn't be under my roof. I remember my stomach tightening, but I still thought it was bluffing. My mother loved threats because threats usually worked. They made other people back down fast enough that she never had to follow through and reveal what she really was. I was wrong. I woke up a little after 2 to the sound of my bedroom door slamming open. At first I thought something terrible had happened. Fire, burglary, a medical emergency. Then the overhead light snapped on, and my mother stormed in already yanking clothes out of my open laundry basket. What are you doing? I said, sitting up so fast I got dizzy. You said you were done, remember? She said. Then be done somewhere else. I got out of bed and tried to grab the basket, but she jerked it away and started shoving things into her arms. T-shirts, jeans, a sweater I loved, underwear. It was so violent, so sudden. My body lagged behind my mind. I kept saying, "Stop, stop. What are you doing?" And she kept moving like I was just background noise. Then she marched straight out of my room. I followed her barefoot down the hall, through the living room, and onto the porch just in time to see her throw the first armful into the street. Not the yard, the street. My shoes, my clothes, my bag, all landing under the yellow wash of the streetlight like proof of something ugly and public. And then she started yelling. "She's running away again! she shouted into the dark. "I can't do this anymore. She's out of control." Lights came on. A porch across the street. Then another. A curtain moved in the house next door. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, while my mother reached for another pile and kept going. I took her in, and this is how she treats me, she yelled. Middle of the night drama, just like always. That was the worst part. Not just being thrown out, but hearing her build the lie in real time. She wasn't satisfied with removing me. She needed witnesses to believe I was the problem before I could even speak. I stepped off the porch and into the cold, grabbing clothes off the pavement with shaking hands. "I'm not running away," I said, but my voice came out thin. She pointed at me like she was performing for the whole block. "Look at her! Look at this!" And then, from somewhere to my left, a man's voice cut through the dark. "We are looking," he said, "and we saw you throw her stuff first." My mother stopped, just for a second. But that second was enough, because for the first time in my life, she had started the lie too late. This time, someone had already seen the truth. I didn't sleep at all that night. There was nowhere to sleep. For one thing, after my mother threw my clothes into the street and screamed to the block that I had run away, I ended up sitting in the front passenger seat of my car with 2 trash bags at my feet. One duffel shoved into the back, and my whole body shaking so hard I could still feel it in my jaw an hour later. But even if I'd had a bed, I wouldn't have slept. Humiliation has its own kind of adrenaline. It keeps replaying the same moments in your head until they stop feeling like something that happened and start feeling like something still happening. My mother's voice on the porch, the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement, porch lights turning on, curtains shifting, her yelling to the neighbors that I was unstable, dramatic, impossible. And underneath all of it, the part that cut deepest, not that she threw me out, but that her first instinct was to control the story before I could speak. That was her pattern. It always had been. My mother did not just hurt people. She narrated them. She needed an audience, even a small one. Family, neighbors, church friends, people at the grocery store. Anyone willing to listen long enough for her to cast herself as the exhausted victim of someone else's failure. She was especially good at doing it with me, because I had spent years helping her keep those stories alive without realizing it. I stayed quiet when she twisted things. I cleaned up the emotional mess afterward. I accepted being misunderstood if it meant avoiding something louder. Dean never had to do that. My younger brother could disappear for 3 days, ignore calls, blow through rent money, and show up full of excuses. And somehow, my mother would tell everyone he was under pressure. If I raised my voice once after weeks of carrying bills and swallowing insults, I was unstable. If I got tired, I was selfish. If I said no, I was cruel. I had been living inside that version of myself for so long that some part of me stopped expecting fairness at all. Even as a kid, I was the one she explained away instead of protected. If Dean forgot something important at school, she would rush to fix it. If I forgot something, she'd tell me I needed to be more responsible. If he yelled, he was emotional. If I cried, I was dramatic. If he failed, she built him reasons. If I struggled, she built me blame. She had been preparing the neighborhood for that porch scene for years, without ever naming it directly. Little comments here and there. Tessa has always been difficult when she's stressed. She takes things so personally. She gets overwhelmed and lashes out. Nothing obvious enough for anyone to object to. Just enough to create a version of me she could pull off the shelf later when she needed it. And at 2 a.m, standing in her nightgown while throwing my clothes into the street, she thought she was pulling that version out again. The difference was, this time, people had eyes. I stayed parked 3 streets over until almost dawn because I didn't know what else to do. I could have called a friend sooner, I guess, but I was too ashamed at first. Shame makes even simple choices feel complicated. It makes you want to disappear before anyone else can look at what was done to you and ask how long you accepted it. Around 4:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Alvarez, the widow who lived across from my mother and had known me since I was 15. "Are you safe?" I stared at that message for a long time. Then another came. "I saw what happened. You did not run away." That was the first moment I cried. Not because the text was dramatic, because it was plain, clean, true. For once, someone had seen the full thing and said it back to me without me having to beg for clarity. I wrote back that I was safe. She replied almost immediately, "Good. Do not let her tell this story for you." By morning, I understood what made that night different from every other ugly thing my mother had done. Usually, she got to me first. First to relatives. First to the emotional framing. First to the explanation that made her look burdened and me look impossible. By the time I opened my mouth, everyone was already listening through her version, but she had gotten too reckless this time. Too loud. Too public. Too confident that she could say whatever she wanted, and the neighborhood would just nod because mothers are supposed to be believed when daughters are inconvenient. The man who spoke up from the dark had seen her throw the first pile. Mrs. Alvarez had seen me come outside barefoot after the clothes were already in the street. And somewhere on that block, I knew there were doorbell cameras. That mattered more than my mother realized. Because control is easy when truth lives only in memory. It gets harder when memory has witnesses. At 6:30, I finally called Nina. She answered on the first ring, sounding instantly awake the second she heard my voice. I gave her the short version because I still couldn't say it all without feeling like my body was outside itself. "She threw my clothes into the street," I said. Nina went silent. Then, "Where are you?" I told her, "Stay there, I'm coming." When she pulled into the lot 15 minutes later, I almost broke again just seeing her. Not because I was weak, because after hours of sitting alone with my mother's voice still ringing in my head, it felt almost unreal to have someone arrive without suspicion, without a lecture, without asking what I had done to provoke it. Nina took one look at the bags in my car and said, "Get in mine. We'll come back for the rest." On the drive to her apartment, I stared out the window and told her more. Dean, the money fight, the porch, the yelling, the neighbors. She listened with both hands tight on the wheel, and when I was done, she said the one thing my family had almost never said to me at the right moment. "This is not your fault." I looked down at my hands because hearing that felt too big. At Nina's place, while she made coffee and cleared space in her spare room, my phone started buzzing again. Not from my mother, from relatives. My Aunt Denise first. "Your mother says you left in the middle of the night in one of your moods. Call me." Then my cousin Leah, "Are you okay? Your mom is saying you ran off." Then another one. "What happened? People are talking." There it was. My mother was already working, still trying to build the same lie before daylight could fully ruin it. Only now, for the first time, I didn't feel panic. I felt something colder, stronger, because she could text whoever she wanted. She could cry on the phone. She could tell the family I'd had an episode, or stormed out, or done this again, even though there had never been an again. But by then, I knew something she didn't. This time, the street had answered back. By 7:30 that morning, my mother's version of the story was already cracking. Not because she stopped talking. She didn't. If anything, she doubled down. That was her instinct whenever truth got too close. Speak faster, cry sooner. Get to people before facts do. But facts had already started moving, and for once, they weren't coming through me. They were coming through the block. I was sitting at Nina's kitchen counter in borrowed sweatpants, staring into a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm, when my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Mark from across the street. I was outside with my dog when your mom started throwing your things. If anyone says you ran off, they're lying." I read it twice. Then a second message came in. My camera caught some of it too. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was relieved exactly. More because my body didn't know what to do with the feeling of not being trapped inside her story for once. For years. Whenever my mother lied about me, the damage arrived first and the proof came second. If it came at all. Usually by the time anyone heard my side, it sounded defensive simply because it came later. But not this time. This time there was footage. This time there were witnesses. This time my mother had done what controlling people always do eventually. She got too sure no one would challenge her. And that arrogance made her sloppy. Nina set a plate of toast in front of me and asked quietly, "You okay?" I gave a short laugh that wasn't really a laugh. I don't know yet, and that was the truth. Because relief and humiliation were tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Yes, people had seen. Yes, they knew I didn't run away. But they had also seen my life thrown into the street at 2 a.m. while my mother shouted like I was some unstable stranger instead of the daughter who had been helping pay her bills. Being believed doesn't erase being degraded. It just stops the lie from becoming the only version that survives. By 8:15, the family texts were getting stranger. My Aunt Denise, who had started the morning sounding cautious and already half convinced by my mother, sent another message. "Your mother says you were screaming. Is that true?" Before I could answer, Leah texted again. "Mrs. Alvarez told my mom she watched your mother throw your clothes out first. What is going on?" I stared at that one. There it was. The shift. Small, but real. Not everyone suddenly on my side. Families are rarely that clean. But doubt had entered the room. And once doubt enters a lie, the person who built it has to work twice as hard to hold it up. I finally replied to Leah, "I did not run away. She threw my things into the street and told people I did." Leah didn't respond right away. 10 minutes later, she sent, "That's not what your mom said." I looked at the screen for a long moment, then typed the plainest thing I could. "I know." Nina watched my face while I texted but didn't interrupt. She had known me long enough to understand that when I got this quiet, it meant something deep was shifting. Not just around me, but inside me. Because every message that came in that morning forced me to confront a truth I had avoided for years. My mother had gotten away with it before because I had helped her. Not intentionally, not willingly. But every time I stayed silent to avoid making it worse, every time I accepted being misunderstood because the alternative felt exhausting. Every time I let her be first to the story because I didn't have the energy to chase everyone down and correct it, I had made her lies easier to carry. That realization was painful. It was also freeing. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. My mother. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach tighten, but not with fear the way it usually did. More like preparation. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice came in already loaded with performance. "Tessa, where are you?" Not "Are you okay?" Not "We need to talk." Just the demand first. "I'm safe," I said. She exhaled sharply, then launched right in. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Mrs. Alvarez is spreading things that aren't true. And now Mark is acting like he saw the whole thing when he clearly didn't." I said nothing. Because that was the clearest sign of all. She wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling because the audience wasn't staying in formation. "You need to stop this now," she said. I actually laughed. The sound surprised both of us. "Stop what? Making me look like some kind of monster." That was the moment my whole body went cold. Not because the sentence hurt, because it revealed everything. Even now, after throwing my belongings into the street in the middle of the night, after yelling to the neighborhood that I had run away, after trying to paint me as unstable before I had even found somewhere safe to sleep. Her focus wasn't what she had done, it was how she looked. I kept my voice very flat. "I didn't make you do any of that." She snapped back instantly. "You provoked me?" There it was. The oldest line in the book. I made her do it. My tone, my boundary, My refusal to hand over money for Dean. My failure to stay soft enough to control. I closed my eyes for a second. No, I said. I stopped funding everyone else's mess, and you lost control. Silence. Then she changed tactics. She always did when the first strategy failed. You need to come home and talk about this privately. Home. That word hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter. Because of course she would use it now. After turning that house into a stage for my humiliation. After making sure the street saw my clothes before I could even get my shoes on. Now she wanted privacy. Now she wanted family dignity. Now she wanted the scene returned indoors where she could manage it better. I'm not coming back there, I said. You are being dramatic. No, I said. I'm done being convenient. She hung up on me. I sat there afterward with the phone still in my hand, breathing harder than I wanted Nina to notice. But she noticed anyway. She always did. What did she say? I looked up at her. She's upset people know. Nina's face hardened in that quiet way some people's do when they're angry on your behalf, but trying not to take over your pain. Well, she said. Good. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had stopped whispering and started connecting details. Mrs. Alvarez sent me another message saying 2 people on the block had seen enough to know exactly what happened. Mark offered the camera footage if I needed it. Another neighbor I barely knew texted to say she was sorry and hoped I had somewhere safe to stay. My mother, meanwhile, had lost the one thing she always depended on most. The first word. By 10:30, people no longer believed I had run away. They knew what actually happened. My mother had thrown me out into the street in the middle of the night and tried to lie about it before anyone could tell the truth. And for the first time in my life, she wasn't just being cruel behind closed doors. She was being seen. By noon, my mother was losing control fast. You could hear it in the way people started calling instead of texting. Texts are easy to keep vague. Calls mean someone wants tone, detail, a hesitation they can measure. That was bad news for her, because her lies only worked cleanly when no one pressed too hard. And this time, too many people had seen too much. I was still at Nina's apartment when Aunt Denise called again. Her voice was different now, less cautious, less ready to automatically defend my mother. Tessa, she said, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a second before answering. I was tired of hearing my own story in fragments. Tired of feeling like every sentence had to be carefully packaged so no one would accuse me of being emotional. So this time, I told it straight. I told Mom I wasn't giving Dean more money. She got angry. She threatened me. Then at 2 a.m, she came into my room, started grabbing my clothes, threw them into the street, and told the neighbors I ran away. Denise was quiet for a moment. She said you were screaming at her. I was asleep. That silence afterward told me more than anything she could have said. Not because she suddenly became a perfect ally, but because facts, when stated that cleanly, are hard to soften into misunderstanding. Then she asked, carefully, did she really throw your things into the street? Yes. Another pause. Mrs. Alvarez told me Mark has footage. I closed my eyes for a second. He does. Denise exhaled slowly. And when she spoke again, I could hear something in her voice that I had almost never heard from anyone in my family when it came to my mother. Discomfort, real discomfort. By 1 o'clock, Dean called. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted to hear what he'd say now that the story was slipping away from our mother's grip. His voice came in hot. You need to stop turning this into some public circus. I laughed once because the hypocrisy was so complete, it barely sounded real. She threw my clothes into the street and yelled to the neighborhood. You know how she gets when she's pushed. There it was, the family shield. How she gets. As if her cruelty were weather. As if the rest of us were just expected to check the forecast and plan around it. No, I said. I know how all of you excuse her. He got louder. You always do this. You always make things bigger. That sentence hit me in a place I knew too well. Because my whole life, that had been the trick. If I named what happened clearly, I was making it bigger. If I left out half the damage to keep everyone comfortable, I was mature. I was done being mature in ways that only protected her. She threw me out at 2 a.m, I said. If that sounds big, that's because it is. He swore under his breath. You could have just left quietly, I went still, because that was the truth none of them ever meant to say out loud. Quietly. That was always what they wanted. My pain, my loss, my humiliation. None of it really bothered them as long as it stayed quiet enough not to stain their image. I hung up on him. An hour later, my mother made the mistake that finished whatever was left of her version. She posted on Facebook, not directly about me. She wasn't stupid enough for that. But it was one of those vague, dramatic status updates people use when they want sympathy without details. Sometimes the people you sacrifice most for will turn around and destroy your peace. Pray for mothers carrying pain in silence. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then Nina, who was standing behind me with her arms folded, said, "She really can't help herself." No, she couldn't, because silence only mattered when it was mine. Her silence was never the truth. It was a performance. And by then, too many people already knew enough to see what that post really was. One last attempt to get ahead of reality by sounding wounded first. The comments started politely. Prayers. Hearts. Stay strong. You've always been such a good mother. Then Mrs. Alvarez commented, just one sentence. A good mother does not throw her daughter's clothes into the street at 2 a.m. and tell the neighbors she ran away. I actually put the phone down. Nina let out a low whistle. Well, there it is. And it didn't stop there. Mark replied that he had seen the whole thing. Then another neighbor, Carla, wrote that she heard my mother yelling before she ever heard my voice. My mother deleted the post 20 minutes later. Too late. Because once other people start saying the thing out loud, the lie doesn't just weaken, it turns against the person who built it. That afternoon, my mother showed up at Nina's apartment. She must have guessed where I was. Or maybe Dean told her. Nina saw her car first from the window and looked at me with that silent question in her face. I stood up, not because I wanted the scene, because I was tired of being chased by one version of the truth while carrying another. My mother knocked twice, hard. Nina opened the door before I got there and didn't invite her in. "What do you want?" Nina asked. My mother looked past her and saw me standing in the hallway. "Tessa," she said, already trembling with anger and humiliation. "We need to end this now." That word again. This, as if this were the problem. Not the porch. Not the street. Not the lie. The fact that I had stopped carrying it alone. I stepped forward. "You mean the truth?" Her eyes flashed. "You are turning people against me." "No," I said. "You did that yourself." She looked at Nina, then back at me, trying to regain her footing. I was upset. You know how hard things have been. I almost couldn't believe she was trying that line on me. "You threw me out. You pushed me." There it was. Still, even now, I felt something in me settle into place so completely it scared me a little. Not rage. Clarity so hard it had no room left for guilt. "No," I said. "I stopped giving you money for Dean, and you decided humiliation would get me back under control faster." Her face changed. Not because she suddenly understood, because I had said the quiet part where someone else could hear it. Nina didn't move. My mother lowered her voice. "Why are you doing this to me?" That question almost made me laugh. Because all my life, she had treated exposure like violence and her own behavior like context. She wanted so badly to be the injured one that even now, standing on someone else's doorstep after throwing my things into the road, she could ask why I was doing this to her. I looked her straight in the face. "I didn't run away," I said. "You needed people to believe that because the truth made you look exactly like who you are." She stared at me. For 1 second, I thought she might slap me. Not because she was that kind of dramatic woman all the time, but because I had finally said the one thing she could not talk over. Then her expression broke, not into remorse, but into something smaller and uglier. Shame, not for what she did, for being seen doing it. She turned and walked away without another word. And for the first time in my life, I watched my mother leave a conversation she could not control. After my mother left Nina's doorstep, I stood in the hallway for a long time without moving. Nina closed the door quietly behind her, but neither of us spoke right away. I think she understood that something bigger than a fight had just happened. Bigger than the porch, bigger than the street, bigger even than the lie itself. For the first time in my life, my mother had been forced to walk away from a story she could not bend. And for the first time in mine, I had not followed behind her trying to clean up the damage. That was the real ending. Not the neighbors finding out. Not the deleted Facebook post. Not the relatives suddenly asking more careful questions because they realized the version they'd been fed didn't match what multiple people saw with their own eyes. The real ending was that I was done carrying the lie just because she was my mother. That afternoon, I went back to the house with Nina to get the rest of my things. I almost asked her to stay in the car, then realized that old reflex, protecting my mother from being witnessed, was exactly what I was trying to kill. So Nina came in with me. The house was quiet when we opened the door. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after someone has screamed themselves out and is now hiding behind closed doors, waiting for the world to settle back into the shape they prefer. My mother was in her bedroom. Dean's car was gone. The hallway smelled faintly like coffee and bleach, as if cleaning could erase what happened there. I walked into my room, my old room, I guess, though the phrase already felt wrong, and started packing what was left. The drawer by the bed, the books on the shelf, toiletries from the bathroom. A framed photo I almost left behind because I didn't want to feel anything while holding it. Each item I picked up made one thing clearer. I was not coming back. Not after this. Not even if she cried. Not even if family called it a misunderstanding. Not even if she found a softer version of events and tried to hand it to me like peace. Some things end the first time they are spoken plainly. At one point, I opened the closet and saw the empty hangers rattling lightly against the rod. That finally got to me. Not because of the clothes themselves, but because of how easy she had made it look. How fast she had turned a bedroom into a message. You have no place here. I stood there with my hands full of sweaters and realized the deepest wound wasn't being put out at 2 a.m. It was being told, in the ugliest possible way, that your shelter depends on how useful and agreeable you remain to the person in control. That kind of lesson gets in your body. It changes how you unpack in new places, how lightly you sleep, how quickly you apologize for needing room, how often you check someone's face before taking up emotional space in a conversation. I had been living with versions of that lesson for years. The porch scene didn't create it. It exposed it. When I finished packing, I left my key on the kitchen counter, not because my mother asked for it, because I wanted the choice to be mine. As Nina and I reached the door, my mother's bedroom opened. She stood there, arms folded tight, face pale and stiff. I could see that she had been crying, but the tears had dried into anger by then. That was usually the order with her. She only let herself feel soft for as long as softness might still win something. "You're really going to let strangers think I'm some monster?" she said. Strangers. That word said everything. Not neighbors who saw it happen. Not people. Strangers. Anyone who witnessed her honestly became less real to her than the image she wanted to preserve. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt almost no confusion, no scramble to explain, no frantic need to find the magic sentence that would make her understand. There was just this deep, steady certainty that she understood plenty. She just didn't like consequences. "I'm going to let people think whatever the truth gives them," I said. Her mouth tightened. You always were ungrateful. That one would have hit me once. Hard. But by then, it sounded tired. Recycled. A line she reached for whenever obedience failed. No, I said. I was convenient. Her face changed. I picked up my bag and opened the door. And that was it. No final scream. No dramatic chase down the driveway. No apology either. Just me walking out in daylight this time. With witnesses, with my head up, and with no intention of ever returning to the role she had written for me. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood adjusted faster than my family did. Mrs. Alvarez brought me soup to Nina's place once and told me she was sorry she hadn't seen through more things sooner. Mark sent me the video file just in case, and never once acted like my pain was gossip. A couple of neighbors I barely knew before gave me the kind of gentle, careful kindness people offer when they understand something terrible has become public and want to make sure your dignity survives it. That mattered more than I expected, not because I needed the block to choose sides, but because for so long, I had lived under my mother's version of events like it was weather no one else could feel. Seeing people recognize the truth without demanding that I soften it first did something important to me. It reminded me that what happened was real, that I wasn't dramatic, that I wasn't unstable, that I hadn't imagined the years of being cast as the difficult daughter whenever I stopped making her life easier. My family took longer. Some relatives quietly disappeared once it became obvious my mother's story didn't hold. Others came around slowly, awkwardly, asking questions they should have asked years earlier. Dean never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Men like him rarely notice the system as long as it keeps feeding them. My mother sent 2 texts in the months after. One said, "I hope you're happy with what you've done." The other said, "I never meant for things to go this far." I didn't answer either one, because that was another truth I had finally learned. Intent is not repair. Regret about consequences is not the same thing as remorse for harm. And silence, after a lifetime of defending myself, can be a form of self-respect. I got my own place 3 months later. Small, clean, quiet. The first night there, I put my clothes in drawers slowly, hung my dresses without rushing, lined my shoes along the wall. No one was yelling. No one was judging how much space I took up. No one was waiting to tell me gratitude should matter more than safety. I sat on the floor among half-open boxes and understood something I wish I had understood sooner. At 2 in the morning, my mother threw my life into the street and told everyone I ran away. By morning, the neighbors knew the truth. And for the first time, so did I. I had not spent my life dealing with a difficult mother who occasionally lost control. I had spent it carrying someone else's lies because I thought that was the price of being loved. It wasn't. It was only the price of staying convenient, and I was done paying it.